Hey everybody, this is Savannah from earthandwater.co. Today I am here with Sinead Kennedy. She talks about relationships and helps people with the romantic relationships so that people like me don't have to. Because I love to talk about relationships. I love to talk about all the different types of relationships because, people really hyper focus on the romantic relationships and they forget that we also have relationships with our family, our friends, platonic relationships, relationships with coworkers, but then it gets even deeper with like relationships with food and money, and just everything is a relationship, right? Relationships with yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that because I think like I'm a psychotherapist as well. And I suppose that's one of the things you when you get into the work of how we work as unconsciously as beings, like we tend to be the same in all of our relationships, whereas, with our relationships with food is similar maybe to our relationships with people in some kind of unconscious way, which is quite interesting, I think.
It is really interesting, and I was like actually going to ask you if we were, because you know man, I feel like I have a probably the reason I don't like romantic relationships, other than people hyperfixating on them, is because it's not something that I have ever had to struggle with. Me and my husband have been together since we were 16, and I wasn't looking for a partner at that time. I just, was out there having a good time, and then suddenly clicked with him, and he just never went away. And here we are, like 15 plus years later, and everything's great. So I know I'm blessed in that situation, and it's not something that I have ever had to navigate. But it's weird because I do okay in that relationship, but me and my family have only just now begun to cultivate a good, healthy relationship. And then friends, man, platonic relationships, that's a conversation we could do, because we've really lost the art of platonic relationships. A
Mm.
lot of people, it's hard to navigate when things become intimate with a platonic relationship, because then things tend to sometimes get messy, right?
Mm.
I know I'm learning from like my children, especially because my daughter especially is very friendly. So when she sees her friends, she runs up and hugs them. She,
Mm.
holds their hand, and they do things like that. But like, I don't know if it's Western culture though, because we were founded by Puritans and whatnot. So it's like nobody touch anybody. That's touching is
Mm.
bad. So, and touching automatically leads to romantic stuff, right? But like, it's, I'm learning through my 5-year-old that that's not true. It's, you know,
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of how we interact, like, I mean, when you look at children, they're so innocent and it's before all of the cultural and familial and whatever conditions come into their lives. They can be more free, maybe with the way that they love and the way that they show love. Um, but as adults, we have all that conditioning that kind of comes in, whether it's culturally, whether it's family, whether it's, you know, from our religious beliefs or whatever. That always kind of, I suppose that has an influence on how we show love or how we touch or embrace or whatever.
absolutely. You said you're living in Spain right now. Are you from Spain?
No, I'm actually from Ireland.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
hence the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find the culture there is different than what I just described? Like people are cool with hugging, or are there more huggers over there?
Yeah. I think yeah, we're okay with that. But again, I think it depends on the kind of individuals. Maybe if you came from a more kind of a family that is maybe more touchy-feely or whatever in that way. I think it's yeah, I don't know that as a whole I can say for all of the Irish people, but I think it depends really on your on your family maybe or what you're used to. Doesn't mean that you can't change it, I suppose, as you get older.
Sure, that's something that I'm working on because I think maybe had I been born into a hugging family, that I probably would have been a hugger myself.
Mm,
I was not like my family, like we didn't cuddle, we didn't nothing. We was very standoffish, but my husband's family are huggers. So
mm,
I have went back and forth, I've tried to allow myself to be uncomfortable, but
mm,
like trying to become a hugger because
yeah.
I think a lot of us are starved for that physical touch. It's definitely a love language. Me and my friend were talking about it last night, um about our love languages. Mine is definitely words of affirmation. I need to hear that everything's cool and everything's, and then acts of service, but my third one is definitely physical touch. And she said that physical touch is her primary love
Mm,
language, which makes it really hard because, yeah, we don't do that around here, really.
yeah, yeah, it is quite difficult. And I think maybe something that also comes into this is I suppose you're not just the cultural influence or the family that you grew up in, but also like maybe trauma or what it's like to kind of feel safe in your body as well.
Absolutely.
Or I work with a lot of people who are like neurodivergent as well, and touch is just not something that maybe they want as much. I'm not speaking for all neurodivergent people, by the way, but you know, um, so I think those kind of things come into it as well. Like, and then when we come together in relationship, it's like, okay, how can we give another person what they need while also kind of protecting ourselves in it as well, or being honoring our own boundaries and yeah.
Absolutely, because I myself am neurodivergent, and yeah, touch is a big thing for us. And, it can be really overstimulating, really I know if I sit next to someone, and it can be someone I love, it can be someone I'm close to. If I sit next to them in a chair and our legs are barely touching, that's all I can focus on. It's all I can think about. And it's like, don't be weird, don't pull away, don't like oh my gosh. And it's really exhausting. Do you have any advice for people who would they want to be huggers, but they want to be comfortable, but they're also not sure about people's boundaries? And some people, you can tell they're okay with hugging, other people are definitely not. But then you have that limbo where it's like with me, I want to be, I I'm happy to receive a hug anytime, but I also am incredibly awkward and incredibly stiff just by nature. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think this is all about communication, isn't it? I think you just really have to ask, like, what, if, and unless, I mean, a lot of the time, I think we are responsible for our own boundaries. But if, you're unsure about another person's boundary, it's okay to ask, you know. I
that's
know it might feel a little awkward, but, it's better than, stepping that boundary for somebody, I think.
absolutely, communication is also something that I think a lot of us struggle with these days.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think even and I suppose that's what comes into relationships as well with every kind of relationship is like oh, I always talk about people that like as human beings sometimes we nearly want people to read our minds all of the time It's like they love me. How could they not know that I don't like this, or I don't want to eat that for dinner, or whatever the situation is. But really, we have to learn, and it is a skill,
Mhm.
how we can communicate that to the other person. Um, and yeah, that takes, I suppose, embracing vulnerability in a way as well, which is scary.
A lot of trial and error, a lot of
Mm,
throwing noodles at the wall and seeing what sticks, because you know not everybody communicates the same way, which
sure.
can be really frustrating because for example, my friend and I last night, I needed to talk to her about something, but neither of us do really well at let's see, how do I explain this? I'll sit down and I'll be like, we need to talk. And she'll be like,
Mm,
okay. And we'll try. And then we hit a brick wall.
mm,
And it's, a lot of factors going into that, whether it be trauma or just neuro spiciness and lots of things. But what we ended up doing was when we hit that brick wall, I walked away and went and did some yard work and recalibrated my thoughts through text, because sometimes if we can write down the communicate, like what we need to communicate, we can more easily, like, so I bullet pointed it is what I
mm,
did, and then I came back and then we were able to really touch on everything we needed to touch on for both of our sakes. And
mm.
she was like, because she's not a texter, but I am a texter, and she'd rather get on a phone call, and I short circuit on a phone call, which is funny considering I do this right here. But
Yeah.
also there's a difference between just listening and seeing. I can see you, and body language is a big part of communication as well. So I find that easier than a phone call. But she was like, if I can try to text more, if that's something that can open up communication with us. And I was like, there's a lot of different ways we can communicate. It doesn't matter to me which way we communicate, as long as we find a way to communicate. And I think that that's something that people struggle with, is not realizing that there's a lot of different modes of communication. You just got to
Mm,
figure out what works best for you in this particular relationship.
yeah. And that's a really interesting point that you just said at the end, in this particular relationship, because it does, change and mold depending on the relationship, their communication style. And I think that's so interesting, and what a I suppose a nice moment for you guys to have, of like, okay, well, if I bullet point this down, then this is a way that we can communicate. And it actually reminded me of my own mother, because she does the exact same thing. She's like, every time I go to like a kind of conflict conversation, maybe, or a kind of hard conversation, she goes into that kind of freeze mode, or kind of forgets what she wants to say. So yeah, she uses that way of kind of communicating. It helps her. Well, she's a writer as well, so it kind of helps her to, get her point across. But yeah.
Yeah, because it's hard to we get emotional. And so we get in those, we go into these hard conversations, usually, not always, but usually with the best of intentions. We've identified a problem and we need to talk about it and address it so that we can move through it and fix it, so that there's no like hard feelings, nobody's resentful, nobody's holding up and bottling up and stuff. But and we start opening up about the thing that's bothering us or whatever, and emotions get activated, and then yeah, we forget what we're trying to say, we forget our point, that brings up another point, and now we're
Mm.
covering this and that, and now the two things are completely intertwined, even though they're two separate things, and now everyone's confused. So
Yeah, yeah, I think a lot of people will relate to that. Yeah, and I mean, we call that kind of like emotional flooding, and the thing is just like, then we I tend to kind of get annoyed at ourselves then of like, that we go through all the things we wanted to say in our mind after the conversation has happened. Um, I think it's learning maybe as well to like, how can I keep myself in a kind of regulated, I suppose, or calm state enough to be able to like have this conversation that it's not going to like overwhelm me too much, because it's so normal, when we say like forgetting our words or our point or not being able to get the words out, that's actually because of what's happening in our brains when we get overwhelmed like that. We're not kind of um the part of our brain that's activated is not the part of our brain that is responsible for all of our logical thinking and our language and our memory. That's kind of offline. So we're working from this kind of survival part of our brain where, it's very difficult to kind of have a proper problem solving conversation when we're so flooded.
Yeah. And then okay, so yeah, each person, this right here, right? This is what we're doing right here. Communication. It's so hard. But it's so necessary. And then, we have discrepancies in, let's use this as an example. Language, essentially. Okay. Like we're talking about neurodivergence earlier. I saw this study that said that, because neurodivergents have historically been labeled as bad communicators.
Mm,
And they did this study and they put a bunch of neurospicy people in a room together and a bunch of neurotypical people in a room together, and they all communicated really well with each other. And then
mm,
they mixed them up in a room together, and there was like this disconnect. There's a bridge that for some reason is really hard to bridge the gap between some neurodivergent people and some neurotypical people, which probably isn't universal. Everybody has their skills and their talents, and communication is a skill that you can learn and perfect.
mm,
But I am very neurospicy, and my husband is very neurotypical, right?
mm,
And most of our relationship has been physical and like kind of like business oriented, like, hey, your goals still matching my goals, all right, cool. And then we can just quietly navigate one another. We don't He is not who I go to for stimulating conversation.
mm,
It's not gonna happen.
mm,
So me and him trying to communicate with each other when a problem does arrive is hilariously catatonic. And I don't mean catatonic in like a unhealthy way. It's just emotions are going to get heightened. I can be like, yo, XYZ. And we will
mm,
go through the entire alphabet before 30 minutes later, I'm crying. I'm frustrated. I had to walk away and breathe like twice. And now we're
mm.
back. And he's like, oh, XYZ. And I'm like, I literally used those words in the beginning. But sometimes relationships are like that, and it's just a matter of, are you willing to stick it out and keep trying, right?
Sure. I mean, it's two human beings coming together. And, you mentioned that you've been with your husband for a long time. And I think, you're growing and changing. There's all other influences are in your life, all other relationships and situations. And it's like that all comes into the relationship too. And, you grow and change together. And sometimes that means that different kind of things come up, I suppose, and different ways of communicating. But, it's finding, I suppose, that way that works for you and trying, as you say, kind of to take that time out when you need to kind of calm yourself down and come back and try work it out.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating to me too that we're constantly growing and changing, and
Mm-hmm.
different situations and circumstances are coming up. The only constant in life is change, which
Mm-hmm.
means as soon as you figure out a system and a mechanism that works for you, it's going to change on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. And I think as human beings, we crave that certainty, you know. Um, we want to kind of believe that if we figure it all out, okay, everything's going to be the same, and certainty is what we crave. But I mean, we never have that. It's
No,
kind of
it's
an
all
illusion.
illusion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think, some people are more comfortable with change than others, but it's still always uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, even for myself, like I grew up in a family where we moved even home a lot. Um, and so for me, change is something that I like, because even though there's always an uncomfortable aspect to it, but I like it because that was part of my surroundings growing up. That was part of what I was used to growing up. And so sometimes I have to pull myself back because I'll want to kind of change things too much or kind of create change in my life, when really it's okay to be, you know, static for a while. It's okay to kind of be in the moment. You don't always have to be creating change.
I was trying to navigate that yesterday about how because part of building good relationships with people is recognizing that you yourself have flaws and traumas and things that you have to kind of keep yourself in check also, so that you're not, the toxic one in the
Mhm.
relationship, or, hopefully nobody's toxic, but um it's not
Mhm.
always the case, because we all have things that we have to navigate in and of ourselves that are not perfect, and that's okay. That's part of the beauty of being human, right? But
Yeah.
would you have any advice on how to recognize whether or not your uh mechanisms for things are healthy or not? Because like I've personally which, again, I'm neurospicy, and that means a lot of emotional dysregulation, not that I
Mhm.
can't regulate emotions. It's just that it took me a lot longer and a lot more work to,
Mhm.
for one, learn that I needed to in the first place, because a lot of people, we're not even aware of the things that we need to do. But I get really passionate about things, and I get really like worked up about things, and it kind of like things explode out of me sometimes in not necessarily an angry way, even though it could be perceived like that. It's just high energy. And so I'm always trying to figure out, am I being toxic? Is this okay or is it not? And it's a really fine line trying to figure out what's okay and what's not sometimes, because, nothing's black and white. Everything's grayscale. Everything's a spectrum. And
Mhm.
I had this friend that was really, really toxic. And me and her were really close for like 3 years. And everybody was telling me that she was toxic. And I was like, no, no, she just needs some more help. She just needs someone to believe in her. She just needs. So now I'm concerned that not only, turns out she definitely was. I just didn't see it until, it was way later. And
Well,
so now I'm always like concerned that I can't recognize toxicity in
mm,
other people, which makes me like really concerned that I can't recognize it in myself. And, what makes it even harder is that sometimes people project things, uh, not only we project not only what we are dealing with, like, let's see, um, like I'm doing this, so subconsciously I'm going to project it onto you,
Mm.
but also like from our traumas, like other people did this to us, so now I'm projecting that you're doing it to me too. And it's just really hard to navigate and keep straight what is truth and what is not.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have
Mm-hmm.
any advice for any of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of work.
It is.
But I think even in your curiosity, it tells me something, because it's like, I think what's maybe more dangerous is the people that don't question, that it's always about the other people and the place or whatever, that it's never looking inward, and I think your own curiosity about yourself tells me that, you are kind of thinking about your own behaviors and thinking about how that might affect another person. And so when you talk about, are you being the person that's being toxic? I think in just being curious and being self-aware in that way, that definitely is the step in kind of, um, I suppose, changing behaviors maybe that are not working in certain relationships or not. Does that, am I making sense?
It does. It just comes back to it being a case by case individual.
Example, yeah, it's not black and white, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think what also comes into that again is like boundaries, knowing what's okay and what's not okay for you. And also the other person in the relationship being responsible for what's okay and what's not okay for them. And if you're unsure, asking, you know, is this okay for you? Or did I read that wrong? Or, that it's a work in progress and you're always checking in, I suppose.
Communication.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I had I and I people used to joke that if I had a family crest or a family slogan or whatever, it would be talk to me,
Mm,
because I'm constantly trying to unpack everything and about myself, about everybody else, about I overanalyze and until like there's nothing left to analyze, and there's always something left to analyze. So uh, but I was talking to people yesterday because I had a really bad day emotionally yesterday for no particular reason. It was probably just low dopamine levels and overthinking. But yeah, I had one person tell me that I just needed to learn to trust myself, and
mm,
that's a hard one, especially when like you're coming from trauma and you have a history of people gaslighting you. And
mm,
man, yeah, that's something that I definitely struggled with for I was marinated in some gaslighting. I'll tell you what, I there was a point in time where the only thing I was sure of was that my favorite color was blue. And I would tell people that. I'd be like, man, I don't know anything. I don't have a clue. I um yeah, we're not gonna get into the details of that. But I don't even know what my favorite color is at this point.
yeah, well, that sounds like, I suppose, when we do get kind of caught, or when we have had a traumatic background, or um being in relationships where maybe it's always been about another person, or like codependency or gaslighting or those kinds of things, it's really difficult to know you and what, you know, who you are and what you like or what you dislike or what your values are. You know, I think, like, talking about that a little earlier, like sometimes we kind of live by maybe our community's values or our family values. And then when we kind of go, well, actually, this isn't really working for me, but I don't know what is, and I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know who I am without that.
Mm.
And it's kind of a journey of self-discovery from there, really, thinking and looking inwards, which is work,
It
but worth
is. It's so much
it.
work. And people don't want to do it a lot of times. It, I teach yoga and meditation, both
Mm,
online and in real life. And it took me, because essentially the work is, it's a form of meditation. And
mm,
you can do it through journaling, or you can do it through just sitting and thinking. Like there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But it took me a really long time to figure out what meditation even was,
mm,
because when you Google what is meditation, I think it's changed now, so don't quote me on this, like don't go check me, because it's going to tell you something different now. But 10 years ago, 12, 13 years ago, when I first started getting into meditation and yoga, it was not big like it is now. Now pretty much everybody more or less understands kind of what to do with meditation, sort of, sometimes. Anyway, moving on. But yeah, used to, when you Googled meditation or what is meditation, it would say the act of meditating. I was like, wow, that is ridiculously unhelpful, because I would YouTube all of these guided meditations, and they'd be like, okay, lay down, close your eyes, get comfortable. We're doing that. We're breathing. Okay, cool. Now you're in a forest. All right, cool. I'm in a forest. And you're visualizing all of these things. And I was like, this is great and all, but like, what is the point? I don't understand. Like, I need to know what the end goal here is so that I can work towards that. Because, like, all right, I'm walking through a forest. Like, yeah, okay, there's a book. What's on the cover of the book? A mushroom. I don't know. But so it took me a really long time to figure out that meditation really is just unpacking yourself. It's
mm,
unpacking, it's sitting around and trying to figure out who you are, how you are, and why you are that way.
mhm,
um, why the world is what it is, and why the people around you are the way they are. And once I finally figured out what meditation was, it was like, wow, I've been doing this my entire life, because all I did as a kid really was lay in my bed and stare at my ceiling and wonder why.
mm,
Why so many things. But now, once I really like got into meditation and saw the benefits of it, it's it's what I do now. I teach yoga and meditation, and I teach restorative yin yoga, so it's a lot slower paced. It heavily focuses on meditation. We'll sit in a pose for like 2 to 4 minutes, where we're
mm,
just sitting there. Like, if you can fall asleep in that pose, that'd be great for 2 to 4 minutes. Anyway, we don't want to overdo it. But I have a really revolving door problem of getting uh students to stick with it,
mm,
because the internal work that I'm prompting makes them so uncomfortable that
mm.
they literally crawl out of their skin trying to sit quietly with their thoughts and their feelings. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, working as a therapist, I experienced the same thing. Sometimes it's difficult for people to get quiet, because that's when everything comes up.
Mm,
And I'm sure, you're aware. Well, I heard some of the podcasts that you've done before as well on trauma, and so much of that is stored in our bodies, is stored in our nervous systems, and then when we go in, all of that comes up,
mm,
and that's really difficult and hard to sit with. But it's you know working on that, I suppose, in a phased way as well, and bringing people, because that's where the change happens, but it's not easy.
No. And people get really overwhelmed because, if you're say 30 years old and you've never unpacked any of it or tried to start healing, like, and you're just now getting started, it's crazy overwhelming. And
Mhm.
it's panic attack, anxiety inducing overwhelm to where, and I've had like some panic attacks where you feel like you're literally about to die. Like I've
Mhm.
actually ended up in the ER a couple of times from panic attacks.
Yeah.
Not
You're not
lately. Do
you're
I?
not you're not alone in that,
I know.
it's scary,
Hmm.
and it does feel like that, especially if you don't know what it is,
Hmm.
wow. But yeah, and like it's interesting that you say about, like what comes up and all the anxiety and all the panic attacks. It's like, even when I work with people therapeutically, it's like I kind of have to say, like, you might feel better or you might feel worse before you feel better, because we're walking around with all of our defenses up, trying to protect us in the world that we're living in. And maybe that worked for you for a long period of time because it did, because that's why you're here. You develop these defenses as a way to survive. And at the same time, now they're not working so well for you anymore. And we have to work with that and what's underneath all of that. And that's going to bring up some stuff. And that's hard to sit with. But if you can, um, there's amazing things on the other side.
Absolutely. And we just have to take it slow and
Mm,
take it one day at a time, one session at a time, 1 minute at a time.
exactly. And make sure that you're in the right environment for you as well, with the right people doing that kind of work.
Yes.
Um, because again, that's creating safety for yourself when you're bringing up things that don't feel very safe.
Absolutely. We work with in yoga and stuff, we work with the multifaceted, uh, the mind, the body, and everything
Mhm.
in between, right? So sometimes, even though we should be working together as a whole, you want to address your entire being as a whole. Sometimes when you're first getting started with all of this, it's easier to section it up a little bit. Like,
Sure.
with, like, for example, your environment, making sure that you're in a safe, clean environment. And I really emphasize cleaning, like
Mhm.
actually cleaning your room. If you're feeling like overwhelmed and uh stagnant and just, whatever you got emotions and stuff going on, uh you look, because the inside reflects the outside and vice versa, right? So a lot of times it's easier when they're so overwhelmed they don't even know where to start. I'm like, start with the physical, start with
Mhm.
your environment, clean your room,
Mhm.
start with food. That's something tangible that you can touch and taste. And because it all translates to the same energy. If you're feeling overwhelmed and caked up and you're feeding yourself nothing but fried and processed food, that's a thing. So
Mhm.
you can start by cleaning that up a little bit, which also is overwhelming to people. I understand. I get it. I struggle with foodstuffs a lot, but it's a relationship
Mhm.
between not only the food and yourself, but your body and yourself and your mind and yourself. So sometimes it's easier when you're trying to unpack trauma to, you know, clean up your food a little bit. If you're eating some grapes and an orange is going to feel a lot better than the fried chicken. And that's going to get you in the direction of clean, healthy progress. And people are like, well, what does food have to do with the trauma that I experienced as a kid? Well,
Mhm.
a lot, actually.
Mhm.
And instead of just like facing the bull head on, that is the trauma, and like, you know, how you felt as a child when all of this was going on, and unpacking the things that that led to. And you know, now you're have a trouble in relationships because gaslighting was so hard that not only you can't trust yourself, but you don't trust anybody else. And unpacking all of that, like, that's emotionally charged. Whereas if you start over here with food and then move and kind of like meet it in the middle, it takes kind of the edge off.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the way that this conversation is going, with all professionals, I suppose, that are working in this area of helping people to heal, because I feel like it's changing, that we're bringing everything more together. There is more of a holistic view on things, and especially in my field with all the neuroscience that's coming out, around the mind body connection and everything else. It's like people are starting to listen,
Yeah.
and that we are whole beings, our mind, our body, our soul, and our relationship with food, and yeah, when we start to, it's all about looking after ourselves and self-care. And when we can begin to do one thing, then we can start to do another.
Hmm.
Obviously, healing is not linear.
No.
And we feel like we're taking a few steps forward and a few steps back. Um, but yeah, starting with those little ways of looking after you.
I feel like healing is spiral. It's a spiral. And
Mm,
I joke about it because, you know, when we have emotional spirals, which
mm,
are exactly the same thing, you know, it's all a spiral, and you get a little bit better each time, but it's always spiraling in on itself to reveal the same patterns over and over again. And that's where you really see the work, is when you start noticing the spirals and the
mm,
patterns, and you start noticing that, okay, well, this pattern with food keeps popping up, but awareness, just hyper awareness, really is all of the work. So that,
mm,
you know, when that pattern reappears, because it's going to reappear, um I'm not sure if some of these patterns ever actually go away.
mm,
And that's something that we kind of need to like understand too, going into this, that um we may not completely ever fix ourselves. And I say that with quotation marks, because we can accept that we're just fine where we're at.
mm,
And that, you know, fixing is relative. It's um might not actually need to be fixed as much as it needs to be like accepted and loved and appreciated and understood. And
sure.
as long as it's healthy
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And sometimes our need to fix comes from a place of fear and rejection of ourselves, and like, yeah, like what you said, when we can come to a place where we can accept certain parts of ourselves, um, it frees us up a lot, I think.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
find modalities that work for you when those patterns pop up.
Yeah. And some, like as you say, it's a kind of self-awareness, and then sometimes that can be the most frustrating part, because you're like, okay, I can see this coming up again and again and again, and yet nothing is changing. And
Yes.
that's frustrating. um and sometimes, it's about embodying the change that you want to see, and really oh,
Oh no, you froze. There you go. You're back.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I just said, sometimes we can embody that change and really, um, change in that way. And then sometimes we can't. And then, as you say, sometimes that's about acceptance.
Yeah, part of my emotional spiral for yesterday was I'm hyper aware that all of like that I'm my biggest problem. All of the
Mm,
problems in my life are caused by me. And that is really frustrating because how do I stop being me? And which, brought us back to the whole am I toxic conversation I was having, and expectations, and what amount of expectations are healthy versus having too many expectations for a human being who's doing their best and is stuck in a society that works against us at almost
Mhm.
every turn. So I mean, we're all stuck between a rock and a hard place with just how we've created the world, and all we can do is just chip away a little bit at a time towards better and progress, and recognize and remember that we're all in this boat together, and we all are on the emotional edge of crying a lot of the days, and just knowing that you're not alone in that for sure helps.
Absolutely. The universality of being human and what that means helps us to feel less alone. And I mean, even for myself and my own personal development and practice with clients is something that comes up quite a lot is, needing to be part of the bigger picture and not feeling so alone in that like a lot of the suffering and the things that we go through in life is part of the ups and downs of being human.
Absolutely, there's definitely a pandemic of loneliness, and
Or
for a lot of reasons. We've for one, the internet has been wonderful in bringing people together and helping us create these communities. Um, which is funny because, back when it was first up and coming, social media and the internet, everybody was like, "Oh, it's making us all separated," and it definitely can. So it's got like both of those factors to it, to where it really divides us in a lot of ways, but it
mm,
also really brings us together in a lot of ways too. And that's, anything can be healthy or unhealthy depending on how you use it and utilize it and all of that. But
yeah.
we're social creatures. We're meant to live in little pods, not individualized. We're supposed to, families are supposed to live together and help with all of the things, because just being human is hard. Like, you take the emotional stuff baggage out, and I don't, do you have any children?
No,
You don't?
not yet.
It's the hardest thing in the world. Okay. It is the hardest thing in the world. And especially with how we've created our societies. We all section ourselves out. So it's a nuclear family in each house. And so it's often two parents are not enough for
Mm,
one child. Okay. Like, well, that's a little dramatic, but at the same time, it's not, because they require constant, around the clock attention, energy, work, all of that. And two parents is not enough. And because we're such complex beings,
mm,
not only do you have this child who's complex and developing and has to be taught and learned and loved and fed, and but we have to do that for ourselves. And especially if you're trying to heal from trauma of the past,
mm,
so you're trying to navigate your own struggles, and then you have a 2-year-old that's screaming in your face. It makes
mm,
things extra difficult. But, you know, sectioning ourselves off in nuclear families is a fairly new concept. We didn't live like that until very, very recently. Before that, you stuck all the kids together, and they're a lot easier to manage when you have a group of them. And that's something that people don't understand. I never say no to any friends coming over, if, um, if I have friends or family members that need a babysitter, I'm always like, absolutely, bring them on. I have a house
mm,
full of kids all the time, because the more you have, if you have two already, but like I do, I already have two.
mm,
They're going to be here. They're here all the time. Sure, add more. That's less work on me, because they'll entertain each other, they'll talk to each other, they'll collectively, sometimes they'll feed each other, it just makes it a lot easier. And so it drives me crazy, because yeah, kids take a lot of work, and they can be incredibly frustrating and incredibly irritating, and especially when you're trying to navigate your own problems and you're like, really, you're having an emotional breakdown because I gave you the blue cup instead of the green cup. Do you want to know what real problems are, child? And like, so I get it, but at the same time, children can heal us if we let them. They
Oh yeah.
can, they can show us what's actually important in life, because life's too short to be a serious, dull adult. We need to play more. We need to take things less seriously and more fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. That concept of play as well, because that really, is part of being human, and fun is part of basic need for us. And yet I think as adults we get so serious and we get so into work and whatever else that we forget that part of us, and then we wonder why we're all feeling depressed and
Mhm.
disconnected. you know we need to prioritize that in our lives as well. But it's funny you were saying about, being lonely, I suppose, and how, that we've changed as human beings from kind of, I don't know if this is an Irish thing, I feel like it is, but we have a saying in Ireland, like it takes a village to raise a child,
Mhm.
because we definitely in rural Ireland still, I think there is still a big kind of community feel. Now in the cities, it's getting more individualized, and again, maybe people getting a bit more lonely, but I think we need to bring community definitely back into our lives in whatever way that looks like for us. But I mean, we definitely need connection.
Absolutely. I feel like we're moving back towards the village aspect. We are, because everybody craves it.
Mm,
And it's just a matter of, cultivating the relationships in our life,
mm,
because we're so quick, because we've been blessed with the internet, and now we're all aware that narcissists exist and gaslighting is a thing. And so now we're all like hyper vigilant, because we're recognizing where we have been affected by these things in our lives. So we're, oh, we're really quick to cut people off these days. Like the first red flag that comes up, we're like, oh, that's a red flag, I'm out, you're toxic, go away, like leave me alone, I block. And well, we're all that until we're not,
mhm,
because we didn't have that awareness until
mm,
recently. Because if we didn't know narcissism was a thing, we didn't know gaslighting was a thing, and to find out that it was a thing, you had to really, really dig deep into some books
mm.
at the library, if your local library even had the books on the topics that you needed to look at. And you had to be really, really motivated
Mm,
to go do that, and nobody's going to do that. So,
mm,
you know the I find that most of us were raised in, like, toxicity was more common than healthy relationships up until recently, for sure. And so now we're all trying to navigate that, and we have to identify where our own problems are. And I'm not saying give everybody, you know 3 chances, you're out, maybe.
mm,
Once you've communicated about it and you've tried to work through it, but nobody wants to do that. And it's really hard when, like, you get emotionally charged in these
mm,
conversations. And so, yeah, it all comes back to identifying where you may be the problem sometimes,
mm,
trying to figure out your communication methods and how they work best for you. And I guess just deciding on what actually are your breaking points. Like, I had a client one time, he was talking about his boss, and he was like, man, he's hard. He's he doesn't smile. He can't take a joke. He's he was naming off all of these cons, to his boss. And then at the end of it, he goes, but I can always trust him. He always has my back. And then he named off like a few pros. And I was like, see, that's where we need to be focusing on. Because like if we cut people off at the first red flag, we're left by ourselves. And then self-loathing comes in, because we all have red flags that we have to identify and fix.
Oh, sure. Like, and it sounds as though, your client maybe was kind of empathizing, I suppose, with his boss. He could see, okay, yeah, some of these behaviors aren't right, or I don't like, but I also like this about him, and I can see maybe where he's coming from. But it's interesting that, you talk about, you were saying about kind of families and issues and toxicity, and I definitely, I think there is dysfunction in all families,
Absolutely.
really. And I think it's when we can actually accept that we're human and our families are human, and most people are just trying their best, and still at the same time maybe they miss the mark.
Yeah.
Then we can kind of grow from that, and take responsibility for our lives in the present now and how we want them to be now. And yeah.
Yep. It's a team effort for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming on here today and talking to us. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name's Sinead Kennedy, and I have two strings to my bow, I suppose. I'm a therapist, so it's www.hereforyoutherapy.com is my therapy practice. But I also run a coaching group for women who want to break free from toxic relationship patterns and attract real love into their life. And that's sineadkcoaching.com.
Awesome. And of course, I'll link all of that below.
Thank you so much. This is a really nice conversation.
I enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have a great day.
You too.